The boy was in the wrong place. That is what any Staples Center security guard would have said if they had reached the east tunnel before anyone else found him there, alone, leaning against the concrete wall in a faded orange t-shirt with a number 8 that had become nearly invisible from use and sneakers that no longer had their original color, because there had not been enough original color to survive what those shoes had been through. He was 11 years old. His name was Marcus, and he had no ticket, no credential, none of the things that separate people who belong somewhere from people who have simply found a gap to slip through. It was June 2004. The Lakers were at the Staples Center for Game 5 of the NBA Finals against the Detroit Pistons, with the series tied at 2 games apiece, the kind of situation that transforms an arena into something different from an arena, that loads the air with a specific pressure athletes feel on their skin before they feel it on the scoreboard. A loss, and the series would tilt in a direction that would be very difficult to correct. A win and the championship would be within reach of the hand that had already won 3. That was the weight the tunnel carried that night, and Marcus was sitting inside it as if he belonged there, which was precisely the only reason he had not yet been removed. There was something in the way he sat, quiet and entirely without the nervous energy of someone who is where they should not be, that made the people passing through look once and keep walking. Marcus had slept 3 of the last 5 nights in a shelter 8 blocks from the Staples Center. The other 2 he had slept in a place he preferred not to name even when asked years later, an alley with an overhang that kept out the rain, which in June in Los Angeles was not real rain but was enough to make a difference when you were sleeping outside. His mother was sick with an illness that the emergency room doctors had described with words Marcus had repeated to himself many times without fully understanding them, but had understood enough to know they were serious words said by people who did not smile when they said them. There was an uncle in Inglewood who helped sometimes. There was a teacher at school who knew more than Marcus wanted her to know, and who sometimes left food in his backpack in a way that preserved the dignity of both of them. And there was basketball, which was not an escape, and not a solution, and not anything practical, but which was the thing Marcus understood more completely than anything else in the world, the thing that when he closed his eyes and the external world went quiet was what remained. He had entered through the service corridor at 5:40 in the afternoon, when one of the doors was open for equipment delivery, and the person responsible for that door had looked in another direction long enough. It was not the first time Marcus had entered a place where he had no permission through a gap the world had left open by accident. He had learned to move in a way that did not attract attention, slow enough to appear to know where he was going, fast enough not to give anyone time to formulate the question that would lead to the wrong answer. He had reached the East Tunnel 40 minutes before any player began to appear, and had found a place on the wall, and stayed quiet with the naturalness of someone accustomed to being invisible in environments built for other people. Kobe Bryant had arrived at the Staples Center that afternoon at 4:30, 2 hours earlier than usual. There was a thing that people who had worked with him for years recognized on these days, the days when he arrived earlier than necessary and quieter than usual. It was not nervousness. It was not the electric energy of an athlete at the peak of pre-game adrenaline. It was a different quality, more interior, more like what happens when a person has been having a conversation with themselves that began days earlier and has not yet finished. He had spent the morning at home with his family, and had had lunch with Vanessa, and had been present at lunch in the way that people close to him would recognize as the way of being present when part of you is already somewhere else, already on the court, already inside the 5th game against Detroit, and what remains is the half that still belongs to the world outside basketball. The locker room had gone quiet earlier than usual. Phil Jackson had given his video session with his usual precision, identifying the Detroit defensive patterns that were most important to understand, the moments where Chauncey Billups made his decision a 1/5 of a second before you expected, the moments where Ben Wallace used his body in ways the rules permitted only if the referee was looking in another direction. Then he had left the players alone with the silence he knew some of them needed, and Kobe had walked out toward the tunnel earlier than protocol required, because there was something he did before big games that few people knew and that he had never described publicly in detail, which was to walk the tunnel alone in the silence before the noise and feel the weight of what was about to happen without the mediation of any other human presence. That was how he found Marcus. The boy was where he had been for 40 minutes, leaning against the wall, and had heard the footsteps before he saw who was coming, and had had enough time to consider the option of standing up and leaving, but had stayed where he was, not exactly out of courage, but for the particular reason that makes certain people stay when they should go, which is the intuition that what is about to happen is larger than the risk of being in the place where it will happen. Kobe stopped, looked at the boy. The boy looked at Kobe with the eyes that Marcus had, which were the thing that people who encountered him in those years mentioned first when they spoke about him. Eyes that seemed older than 11 years of any life should produce. Eyes that had seen things that eyes of that age should not have needed to see. Kobe did not call security. That was the first thing. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the boy with the attention he gave to situations that needed to be read before they were answered, and then asked, "How did you get in here?" It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question asked in the tone of someone who wants to know the answer, because the answer is interesting. Marcus told the truth, said through the service corridor, said the door was open, said he had not touched anything. And there was something in the way he said it, direct and without ornament, without the defensive construction children normally use when caught somewhere they should not be, that made Kobe look at him longer than he had planned to stay in that part of the tunnel. He sat down against the wall next to the boy. It was not a calculated gesture. It was the gesture of someone who had decided this was the conversation he was going to have before Game 5 of the NBA Finals, because the act of sitting was prior to the conscious decision. He asked the name. Marcus said the name, asked how old. Marcus said 11. There was a silence that neither of them pushed to end, because both of them, for completely different reasons born of completely different lives, had learned to move inside silence without the discomfort that most people feel when a conversation stops. Kobe asked if he was a fan. Marcus said yes in the way children say yes when yes is insufficient, but is the only word available. And then Marcus said something that Kobe returned to dozens of times over the following years, in private conversations with people close to him, never publicly, because there was something in it that belonged to the tunnel and the night and the particularity of the moment that would not survive the process of becoming a public story. Marcus said, "My mum is sick and I don't really have anywhere to live right now, but she told me that if you win tonight, she's going to be okay because good things happen together." And the way he said it was not the way of a child who is manipulating a situation to get something. It was the way of a child who believes completely what he is saying, with the internal logic of someone for whom the universe still works through correspondences that adults have forgotten how to see. Kobe Bryant went completely quiet after that sentence. It was not the silence of not knowing what to say. It was the silence of someone who has received something that needs time to be fully received. He had played 312 NBA games before that night. He had won 3 championships and had lost series that he still carried with him in ways that did not fully disappear between seasons. He had heard many things said by many people before many games. What Marcus had said was different from all of them, not in magnitude but in quality, in the complete absence of anything that was not true. He took off the sneaker he was wearing, one of the training pairs he used before games during warm-up, signed it with the marker he always carried because he had learned early that situations like this arrive without warning, and it is better to be prepared, and placed it in the boy's lap. Then he said something that Marcus repeated years later in an interview published in a Los Angeles newspaper when the story finally emerged from the privacy where it had lived for nearly a decade. Kobe said, "You keep this, and when your mum gets better, you look at this sneaker and you remember that she got better on the night I won the game, because good things happen together. And you were right about that." Then he stood up, looked at the boy for a moment, and walked toward the court. What happened in Game 5 was documented in every statistical detail the NBA recorded. Kobe Bryant finished with 36 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, in a 2-point loss. That was the loss that pushed the Lakers away from the championship that year, because Detroit won Game 5 and then closed the series in the following game, and the championship went to Michigan with the completeness of something that had been decided before the final buzzer. But what happened inside that game, within what the statistics record, was that Kobe played with a quality that people on the court described afterward as different, not in the technical skill, which was always that skill, but in something more intangible, a presence that Detroit players felt in the moments of highest pressure as something that went beyond individual competition. He had played like someone carrying something inside the game that went beyond the championship, like someone for whom that night had acquired an additional meaning that did not fit on the scoreboard, but that the scoreboard, in some way, was obligated to honor. They lost. That is what happened and what history records. But there are things history does not record with the precision they deserve, and one of them is what Marcus did after Kobe left the tunnel that afternoon. He stayed where he was for the next 20 minutes, holding the sneaker with both hands, listening to the growing noise of the arena filling up on the floor above him, and then stood and left through the same corridor he had entered, passed through the service door that was open again, and walked back along the same path he had taken at 5:40, except that now it was different, because he was different, in a way that 11 years and everything those 11 years had contained had not yet produced in him before. Marcus's mother got better. Not that night, not in a way that an 11-year-old mind could causally connect to the outcome of a basketball game, but in the months that followed, slowly and then with more consistency, she responded to the treatment the doctor had described with the serious words and rebuilt the health the illness had taken. Marcus kept the sneaker, with a consistency that survived every move and every place, and every difficult night of the years that followed, inside a box he had found and carried with him with the same constancy with which religious people carry objects of faith, not because the object had power, but because the object was the physical evidence of a moment when the world had worked exactly the way his mother said it worked. He was 22 years old when the story ran in the newspaper. He was in college in Los Angeles, on a partial scholarship he had built through a path that had not been straight, but had arrived where it had arrived. He had sought out a journalist who covered the Lakers not to sell the story, but because there was a detail he wanted Kobe Bryant to know if anyone ever reached him with that account. The detail was this. When Marcus had said that good things happen together, he had said it because he believed it, but he had said it also because he wanted Kobe to believe it, because there was an 11-year-old boy in a dark tunnel before the most important game of the year who had decided that the most useful thing he could do for a man he had never met before was to give him a reason that went beyond competition to play well. Not out of naivety, out of a specific intelligence of that kind of child, the child who learns early that the world moves through things adults call irrational and that are simply rational in a way that requires more courage to believe. The journalist tried to reach Kobe Bryant for comment before publishing the story. The response that came was brief and arrived through an intermediary and was quoted at the end of the article. The response was, "I remember him." And then there was one more sentence which the journalist placed as the last line of the article, because it was the sentence that belonged at the end, the sentence that closed what the tunnel had opened on that June night in 2004. The sentence was, "I lost that game, but I never forgot why I played it.